Hi friends, welcome back. It's good to see you again this Friday. We appreciate your support. We appreciate you coming back every Friday to join us on these little sessions that we're doing. If you're new here, welcome. We just kind of are looking at a snapshot of history. There's a lot of teachings in the church about the church in the book of Acts from Scripture. And there's a lot of teaching, obviously, about what churches currently believe and their doctrine statements and their statements of faith when you become members. But there's not a whole lot taught between the church of Acts to the church now. How we developed, how we don't worship the same, and how we worship at different times, and how we became different denominations instead of just the one. There's just a big gap there. So that's what we're doing here. Each Friday, we pick out a figure of faith, do a brief biography on that figure, and just kind of reveal how they contributed to get us to where we are today. If that sounds interesting to you, if that's something that you'd like to learn about, you've always had questions about, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, turn on notifications. We upload every single Friday, and they're called our Friday Figures of Faith. We upload at different times during the day Friday, so that notification button will help let you know when it's up and ready to be viewed. I'm Pastor Joe of Living Grace Church, right in Versailles, Kentucky. If you're close or local, we always invite you to join us. You can join us if you're as far away as California. I just figured that'd be difficult for you. Well, everybody's welcome. We're an inclusive church. We just believe that we should be loving on people like Jesus does. So you're always invited to join us. We have services live on Facebook on Sundays, and you're invited to join us and view there as well. Today's figure of faith that we're going to be looking at is D.L. Moody. Now, we're getting into the turn of the century at this point. We have come from St. Augustine in the Middle Ages and before, and we've slowly kind of made our way through history, and now we're getting closer to the turn of the century. D.L. Moody was born on February the 5th, 1837. Now, the D.L., he was born Dwight Lyman Moody. That's what the D.L. stands for. He was the sixth child of 9. There were 9 kids in his family, and he was the sixth one born. His parents were Edwin and Betsy Holton. Betsy Holton, Holton was her maiden name. So Edwin marries Betsy Moody. Edwin was a farmer. He was also a stonemason. Now, Dwight Moody would be born and raised in Northfield, Massachusetts. That's where they were from. That's where he grew up. His father would die when he was really young. He was only 4 years old when D.L. Moody's daddy passed away. Also, incidentally, when his dad passed away, a month later, his mother would deliver twins. So she was pregnant when his father passed away with twins, and a month later she had the twins. They survived, and it made them 9 kids for a single mom to raise. And that's a struggle now, but it was definitely a struggle for a single farmer's widow to raise that many kids. And so the best solution she could come up with was to send some of them away to work for their for food and for board. This wasn't, it was better than selling herself or her children. It was better than stealing. It was an honorable way to provide for the family. Now that doesn't, it's not as bad as it sounds. She's had regular contact with all of her children. There's even an incident where D.L. goes and tells her that it's terrible and he hates it and he wants to come home. And so she talks to the people that he's living with and working for in exchange and finds out that he's fed well. He's fed well. They give him as much as he wants to eat. It's not an absolutely horrible situation. It's not great. We all know kids should not be working 8 hours a day, to feed themselves. We know that's not ideal and it couldn't happen today. But then for the alternative, that was the best thing. And she was like, you are not in a terrible situation. Go back. And she sent him back to continue to work for his food and board. And he wasn't the only child that happened to, but it wasn't like he was gone from her. There was correspondence with her. She insisted they all still attended church services throughout this. So she didn't send them away, as in she never saw them again. There was still contact. They likely worked in the same town. She saw them on a regular basis. She was still able to make her wishes known. She wanted them in church. They went to church. So it wasn't completely out of her hands, and she could terminate that relationship at any time. There was no she had sold indentured servants. It wasn't like that at all. It wasn't the best idea for a solution for her problem, but at the time, it was the best one. Excuse me just a minute. Guys, no. I'm home alone with dogs and the windows are open and somebody walks by and they have to make sure I'm aware. So yeah, it's not great, but that's how he's raised. The oldest son, obviously the same fate, And he ran away, and they didn't hear from him for years and years and years. He ran away and just disappeared, and nobody heard from him again. That was it. He decided it was so awful he wasn't going to do it. Now, I don't know if they went to the same home, like if one home took in like 3 kids, or if they were all individually parceled out. I couldn't figure that out. I couldn't find that. If you know this story better and you know, or there's details that I'm not sure of, feel free to comment, leave it in the comments. We welcome discussion and dialogue, and we think knowledge is power, so any additional information is always welcome. So when DL turns 17, he moves to the city. Now, he went to school until 5th grade, but at that point, no more. It was too much for Mama to do, and that's when he got sent away to begin to work. So he was fifth grade when he began working for his supper, basically. So at 17, he decides he's going to work for money. He's not going to live with people. He's going to work and be a contributing member of society. He struggles to find employment there in Northfield, Massachusetts. He struggles to find a place where he can make enough, or a place that'll even hire him in the first place. So he decides the big city of Boston, Massachusetts is where it's at. Now, Betsy, his mama, her brother Samuel Holton lived in Massachusetts, and he was he sold shoes for a living. He had a shoe shop. And so Dwight would get a job with him. Now, Uncle Sam wasn't super excited about it. It wasn't something he really wanted to do. It was one of those things, it's family, so you do what you can do for family, whether you want to or not, kind of attitude. He didn't see that D.L. Moody had any potential to be anything great. And so it was going to be a burden to Uncle Sam to have him. But regardless, when he comes to town, Uncle Sam employs him. He does well. He actually has great success selling shoes. And Uncle Sam makes the requirement that he has to attend church. He's like, all right, you can work for me, and we'll make sure you have a place to stay and that kind of thing. But you have to go to church, because his fear was if D.L. Moody was left to his own devices and given free time to get into mischief in the city, that he would. And so going to church was going to prevent that for him. So D.L. Moody goes to church. He has no problem with that. He had to do it back home anyway. So for him, it wasn't a big deal. And so 1855 rolls around, and he has a Sunday school teacher named Edward Kimball. And Edward would visit him at work on occasion. And one day, in April of 1555, he sees D.L. Moody at work, and they're back in the stock room. D.L.'s checking stock and making sure what's there is supposed to be there, and, inventory type stuff. And they get to talking about Christ, and Ed is explaining to him about the love of Christ and the power of Christ and the goodness of Christ. And D.L. Moody just gets saved right then and there. He's saved forever from that moment forward. He has a revelation, and he decides he wants Jesus in his life, and nothing else will do. So he's converted at that time. Now, that happens in April. In May of 1855, he applies for membership at the church in Mount Vernon there, where they're attending, and he gets denied. So he gets saved in April. A month later, he goes to the church, and he's like, I want to be a member. I was saved last month. I love Jesus. I'm ready to embark on this new life that honors him and serves him. And the church committee denies membership. So his mentor, if you will, his Sunday school teacher that ministered to him and helped get him saved, quotes what he thinks is the underlying problem to his rejection of membership, if you will. And I'm just going to read his quote directly to give you an idea of the opposition that D.L. Moody had early on in his life, before ministry was even born, just when the salvation happened, just when the idea of I'm going to be a changed person happens. The religious people doubt his ability to change, so much so that they don't grant him membership. So anyway, this is what Ed Kimball is quoted as saying. He says, I can truly say, and in saying so, I magnify the infinite grace of God as bestowed on him, that I have seen few persons whose minds were spiritually darker than his, D.L. Moody, than his was when he came into my Sunday school class. And I think that the committee of the Mount Vernon Church seldom met an applicant for membership more unlikely ever to become a clear Christian of clear and decided views of gospel truth, still less to fill any extended sphere of public usefulness. That was the impression he gave, that he would have no benefit to public usefulness. That his mind was so spiritually dark, they didn't see that he could have a clear understanding of Christianity, to witness about said Christianity and live a life according to said Christianity. And that's just from knowing who he was prior to salvation. So I don't know if he had some vices. I don't know if maybe he had bad language. I don't know what exactly qualified him to have a dark spirit, because they said he was spiritually darker than most people they met. I don't know exactly what he was prior to that. But regardless, they were hesitant. Now they do eventually let him in. A year later, in May of 1856, they accept his membership and he becomes a member of the church. But from that moment on, he's not swayed. There's no doubt for Moody that people say these things about him. I mean, it's terrible, but then just like now, you find out when people are talking bad about you because other people are eager to tell you, right? We always know when somebody says something nasty, it gets back because people love telling you that stuff. So there's no doubt that Moody knew the feelings and the opinions, if you will, of membership. And yet he still wanted to be a member. He still did what it took to apply again and eventually become accepted. So it shows that he wasn't willing to listen to people, that he felt like God had a calling on his heart, and he felt like the only place that would have to start would be in the church. He didn't know how or where to go from there. And again, he only went to school till he was in 5th grade, and there's no indication that he was a great student. So he's very minimal in his education. So for him, the church is where he's got to start. And so he does whatever it takes to start there. Now, in 1857, he starts working at Chicago's Young Men's Christians Association, which is the YMCA in Chicago. He starts to work there and starts in 1857, 1858. For about a year, he works there. He does just janitorial work. And he also becomes like a jack of all trades. If they needed somebody to watch kids on the basketball courts, he did that. If they needed somebody to hang the lights in the cafeteria, he did that. If they needed somebody to repair the awning, he did that. Just kind of, if there was a need somewhere and he could do it, he did it, in addition to being the janitor. He loves it there. He likes dealing with the young people. He likes interacting with the young people. He sees potential and hope in the new generation and in the upcoming generations. And so it's something that a ministry starts to bloom in his heart there. And he does so well there that by 1860, the YMCA's business notes talk about all of his amazing service, how great he is to the organization, how he's eager to help, how everybody likes him, and they even recommend that he remain on staff because he's just such a boon to the organization. Now, he didn't get paid. It's a volunteer spot, but they call him an employee nonetheless and found him valuable and thought that he should stay. There are people going past my window yet again. Hold on. Guys, Fluff, no. The little one gets madder than the big ones. I can usually calm the big ones down pretty quickly. So he's working at the YMCA. He's starting to figure out what the Lord is pulling and calling him to. And so he decides to open up a mission Sunday school in Chicago. He uses a converted saloon to do this. And he has a heart to reach the youth of Chicago. He reaches the lost youth. He reaches the uneducated kids. He looks for the poor kids, the kids who either are homeless or come from a broken home. Maybe they have an abusive parent. Maybe they have a deceased parent. Maybe they have maybe they live with like relatives and the relatives aren't well off. I mean, just anything that would be adversity. He reaches out to the lost of the city. Those are the kids that he really has a heart for, that he really has a minister for. Kids who don't really at that time get a second glance. And really even now they don't get as much, attention as probably they should. And so these are the kids that he has a heart for. And so he starts this Mission Sunday School just for these kids. Now, remember, he only has a 5th grade education. And we don't know how good that 5th grade education was in the first place. And the reason I say this is because here we have a famous person enter the story. In the early days, when he opens this Sunday school mission, President Lincoln is late but decides to attend one. So he shows up and he's late for the meeting. And so when he gets there, President Lincoln says that Moody is up front, of course, and he's got the Bible. And he says he has a, quote, Negro boy with him up front, right? And he says that Moody is reading to the boy about the prodigal son. And he says that Moody can't read several of the words in the scriptures and has to skip over them entirely. That he struggles to get through the story in the scriptures. And then I guess once he was done with the scriptural part, he explained, what was going on and why that was significant and why that was important to the boy. But he couldn't read the scripture word for word. He was not physically able. And it was so detrimental that Lincoln is quoted to have said he doesn't know how God could use such an instrument for his honor and for his glory. So again, people are going, not this guy. No way. This guy doesn't have any education. He can't even read the Bible. He's not a charismatic, everybody come listen to me type guy. This is a cute thing. This is sweet that he wants to do this for these kids, but he needs to get on board with somebody else's ministry and just be a support. He just needs to be helped kind of thing. This, again, when somebody as famous as President Lincoln makes a comment like that, there's no question that gets back to him. There's no question Moody knows what is being said. And chances are Lincoln's not the only one that said it or something similar, that it's not been presented to him before. And yet, tunnel vision. He knows what God has placed on his heart, and he's going to be dedicated to that. And within a year, his Mission Sunday School is flourishing. There's 200 people coming. It is full up, and it is continuing to draw people. And so it doesn't slow him down. He's like, they can think what they want. They can be right. I can't read it that well, but God's called me to do it. I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to let God do what he does. So it's a testament to Moody's faith and to his ability to block out man and his pursuit to just serve the Father. So we're getting through the late 1850s. So now we're approaching the 1860s. Anybody who lives in America knows why that's significant, because in the 1860s, we have the Civil War. It hits. And it hits right as D.L. Moody's gaining traction in his ministry. Now, for most of us, that would stop us in our tracks. For most of us, the financial toll of a war, and when a war is over, I don't care how great you are in any country, there's a recession that follows. War is expensive. So he just kind of has to do that, right? So the thought is, Civil War hits, Moody's not going to be able to do anything. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Because from 1861 to 1865, D.L. Moody decides that he's going to minister to the troops. He does not enlist. He says that's kind of against his conscience to have brother fight brother. He couldn't really reconcile boys from the same home fighting each other to the death. He thought there was a better way. There had to be a better way. And because he believed that, he ministered that. He ministered love, he ministered life, and he ministered truth. He was fortunate enough to be in Chicago, and the 72nd Illinois Volunteer Regiment was at Camp Douglas, which is just outside of Chicago. So he ministered a great deal to those troops. They were close, they were local. He ministered to them. Over the course of the Civil War, he would have 9 visits to various battlefronts. He would get on the line, in war, and minister to these people. It's not that he was afraid of dying. It's not that he was afraid of fighting. He just wanted to be able to fight for what was worth fighting for. And for him, it was the salvation of these troops, the ministry of these men. And so he just went headlong and depended on God to protect him, and God's will be done. So he goes and he starts ministering. He ministers to Union soldiers. He ministers to Confederate soldiers. And this is a common theme that we're going to see with Moody, in that he crosses the aisle. Union, Confederate, Protestant, Catholic, he doesn't care who you are. He has the ability to minister to everybody, and nobody has questions or is upset about what he's saying, because he's not challenging doctrinal statements. He's not challenging sound theology. Again, his education level probably limits what he feels like he can. So he just instead says, Jesus loves you. He died for you. You matter. You are the apple of his eye. There is a better life than what you have now if you just surrender. He just preached a very pure, a very simple, and a very effective gospel to the troops. He even went into Richmond, Virginia and preached, and he preached in multiple different places, of course, but he even entered Richmond, Virginia and preached to troops with General Grant. So, again, he crossed paths with somebody famous in his ministry, and they're treated no different than anybody else he may cross paths with. So that's what's going on from 1861 to 1865. Now, in that same time span, in 1862, he meets and marries his wife. Her name is Emma Revel, and she is the love of his life. They live together until they die. It's a match made in heaven. They have 3 kids. They have 1 girl, and they name her Emma after her mama. And then they have 2 sons. One is William, and the other is Paul. No tragedy there. The kids survive. They do well. They're healthy. And despite of all of the ministry that Moody does, now he will travel and he will evangelize. He will go overseas. We'll get to that. But no matter how entrenched he gets into his faith and how entrenched he gets into his ministries and how entrenched he gets into the call that God has on his life, his family always comes first. There's never a time his family feels slighted. There's never a time when they feel lonely. There's never a time when they question his love or his loyalty and dedication to them. He's able to minister to his family and have them in a place of trust and be reliable to them in a way that a lot of people struggle with. But that wasn't a struggle for him. He was able to do that, and he did that well. In 1864, he starts a new church because the Sunday school mission is just flourishing. I mean, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And a lot of his contemporaries, a lot of his friends, a lot of his contacts are encouraging him, you need to start a church. Because this Sunday school mission is for the lost youth, but more than that is coming, right? There's men and women that are coming to this, and they're being saved, and they're being changed, and they want to follow, and they want to learn, and they want to grow. And so after seeking the Lord and looking into that, in 1864, he starts a new church, and he calls it the Illinois Street Church. Probably because it was on Illinois Street. It's successful. It grows. There's no trouble there. It's actually now we know it as the Moody Church. That's what it's called now. And he starts it in its own building. So that ministry, again, it's like he's got the Midas touch. Every ministry he touches just flourishes and takes off. He's quoted as saying when they ask him about his ministering style and why he didn't tackle these hot button issues of the time and why he didn't really force himself in the political sphere for influence. And he just says, the world is a broken vessel. God has given me a lifeboat and said, save as many as you can. That's my goal. Everybody needs Jesus, and I'm just going to get as many to heaven as I can possibly get there. And as long as he kept that single focus, the path to get there, God would provide the details for, and he did that throughout Moody's life. So we move into the late 1860s, and Moody meets a woman named Emma Dreyer. I know, another Emma. His wife is Emma, his daughter is Emma, and now here comes Emma Dreyer. That must have been like the #1 baby girl name of the time. But he meets Emma Dreyer, and Emma Dreyer is a teacher, and she's an administrator, and she is very successful. She is very intelligent. She has a zeal for ministry. She has an impressive background with scholarship and with organizations and with the many things that she can do and has done. She is just a woman who is independent, and she's strong, and she loves the Lord, and she has a heart for the Lord. Dio meets her, and instead of being intimidated by her, instead of questioning her validity, instead of wondering if she had an ulterior motive, DL is impressed with her. He is impressed with her background. He is impressed with her education. He is impressed with her ability to understand and then to reteach something or a concept to somebody else. It blows him away. So he pulls her on as an ally. He pulls her right into the ministry. He puts her in charge of training women. Dreyer wanted to teach women, of course. And so D.L. Moody knew at that time that there was a ripe harvest of women that needed to be trained. There was a ripe harvest of women that needed to be ministered to. And he also knew that as a man in the time, there were just things he wasn't going to be able to minister to. He couldn't tell them about childbirth. He couldn't tell them about keeping a home. He couldn't tell them about priorities and what should go first. And there were things he couldn't relate to them on as a man. And so he sees Emma Dreyer, and she's the answer to the prayer. She can relate to them. She knows. She understands. And so he looks at her and he's like, I've got a need for you in my ministry. I would love for you to come on board and help me reach those that I may have a limited scope to be able to really, connect with. And she does completely. She's cool with that. So he puts her in charge of training women for evangelism and for missionary work. D.L. Moody, like Charles Finley, like Phoebe Palmer, like John Wesley, like all those that we've studied before, has no problem with women in ministry. He sees no gender. If the Lord calls you, go do it. And he doesn't call you based on whether you're a guy or a gal. He calls you based on whether or not you're faithful, right? And so he's like, train up women. They need to know. They need to learn. They're ministering. With or without our help, they're doing it. So let's equip them. Let's help them. Let's make sure that they know and understand what they're preaching and what they're talking about. And so Emma Dreyer jumps on that, and she begins to do that, and it flourishes under her tutelages. I can't say that word, under her tutelage. It flourishes under her instruction, and it does very, very well. And no doubt, of course, it does. She has just the innate capability to do this type of thing, and she has a heart for it. She has a great zeal to do that. Now, as it grows and as she grows, She begins in her heart to really want an institution that teaches both men and women. She feels like what she's teaching women is no different than what she would teach a man. Don't travel alone. It's safer to travel in numbers. Wait for an invitation. Typical ways to prepare a sermon. Typical ways to reach out to another human being. She's like, it doesn't change based on gender. And she felt a need and a stirring in her heart to be able to teach men and women. At the time, D.L. Moody has all these other ministries going on, and it's not that he doesn't agree, he just doesn't have a focus on it. There's no call, no special pull to that at the moment. And so instead of Dreyer saying, well, I'm leaving because I want to go do this, and instead of her saying, well, I'm going to go with somebody else because they're doing what I want, she decides she's supposed to be with Moody. This thing that they're doing together is working, and it's good for people. And so she just begins to pray that God put her dream on Moody's heart, that God make her dream their dream. And so she just begins to pray that in the late 1860s that Moody would begin to want the same thing, to have the same thing happen. Now, all the while, all of this stuff is going on, the Sunday school mission is still going on. It's still doing well. He's still ministering in that. That never goes away. That continues on throughout everything that we talk about. But as we move out of the late 1860s, we get into the 1870s. And again, if you live in America, you know our history. And on October the 8th, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire broke out. It broke out on a Sunday and it burned through Tuesday. In the Great Chicago Fire, Reverend Moody would lose everything he owns. He's quoted as saying the only thing he walked out with was his family and his Bible. He and his wife immediately went home and packed up the kids. He moved them. They went somewhere safe, somewhere where they weren't in danger. And then he and his wife returned to the north side of town where the fire was raging, and they helped as many people as they could in as many ways as they could until the fire eventually burned out on Tuesday. They continued to minister, and they continued to help as many people as they could in that time. But after everything's said and done, the fire dies down. He takes stock. He looks around and looks at everything he doesn't have anymore. And he realizes this is a chance for me to refocus. This is a chance for me to sit back and say, Lord, what now? Where now? And God answers the call. God's like, I want you to evangelize. And so from this moment on, D.L. Moody decides he's going to evangelize, and he's going to do what God said, and he's going to evangelize the world. He's not going to be limited and restricted to Chicago. And so God begins to open doors, and things begin to happen. And in the early 1870s, the first few years, he travels to the UK. He travels to London twice. He travels to Ireland. He does a whole circuit in other countries. And he becomes very, very popular. He becomes known as the guy who leads revivals in his wake because he was inspiring and encouraging lay people. He wasn't taking priests. He wasn't taking guys that had been at seminary or guys that had been at college. He was taking the farmer and saying, you can lead these people. You can help these people. If you can read the Bible, then you can tell them about Jesus. Then you can minister to the neighborhoods. Then you can minister to the youth. You can minister to the women. He was taking lay people and saying, you have the same power living in you that the holy people do. You have the same God loving you that the holy people do. And the only thing that you haven't, the only thing that and the greatest thing that you have in common with the holy people is you're supposed to be witnessing too. You're supposed to be saving as many as you can. And so lay people were coming up in droves in service to the church, in service to God. And so he was known for inspiring and encouraging the lay people. He was also known to encourage women in ministry. He would minister to women, and he would advocate for women in ministry. He would encourage them. He would teach them. And again, he would kind of blow on that ember in women who felt the call, but maybe not necessarily a place to do it. He kind of fanned the flame in them to say, if not now, when? He encouraged them and he ministered to them, and he became known for that. He also became known, and we talked about this a minute ago, about crossing the aisle. He wasn't dissuaded by the Union soldier or the Confederate. They both had souls. They both needed to know about the Lord. He was the same way with denominations. He could cross denominational lines, and both denominations love him to death. Neither one have a problem with it. When he went to Ireland, things were very, very contentious, like to the point of war contentious between the Protestants and the Catholics, and their disagreements and their strife with one another. And it wasn't considered entirely safe to minister there. D.L. Moody went anyway, and he ministered to the Protestants and the Catholics, and neither one had a negative word to say. Revival still broke out in Ireland. He left being loved by both. He didn't make anybody mad. He didn't make anybody upset because he wasn't talking about doctrine. He was just saying Christ is in love with you. He died to save you. And there was nothing to be argued about that. Nobody would question that. And he just had a very simplistic approach to what the church up until now kind of made complicated. And it worked in his favor, very much so. He became known for that. And then later in the 1800s, 1875 to 1878, he goes back to the States, of course. He buys a little plot of land back home. He goes back to Northfield, Massachusetts, where he was born and raised, and buys a little plot of land there. That's going to be his home base. He still preaches. He's got long preaching trips, but he needs just somewhere where he can go and rest and relax, a place to call home, a place for his wife to call home. And so he buys a little plot of land there, and that's where he goes to rest in Massachusetts before he tackles a tour of the Midwest. He decides he's going to take on the Midwest of the United States and do the same thing there that he did across seas. And again, he's successful. Now, toward the end of this tour, though, he starts to have a pull in his heart to train young Christians again. Just like when he very first started his ministry and started feeling it at the YMCA, and he created his Sunday school mission, the pull is alive again in his heart to train young people. And so at this point, now remember, Emma Dreyer, the woman he hired to help train women in the 1860s, I am so sorry. Weller, no. In the 1860s, she began praying because she wanted to train both. She wanted an educational center that would train both. And so in the 1860s, she was praying about that. So in 1879, 10 to 20 years later, Dwight feels the pull, Moody feels the pull to educate younger people. So God begins to answer Emma Dreyer's prayers. Because in 1879, Moody opens the Northfield Seminary for young women to educate. So this is a piece of it. She's like, this is kind of where I'm going, but not quite there. So then not too long after, he also opens the Mount Hermon School for Boys to educate. It's a piece of it. And she wanted them educated. That was definitely her heart. She wanted them to teach and she wanted them to learn, but she felt like there was no need to separate them, that the genders could learn together and that one person could teach both genders. And so not too long after that, in 1886, the Chicago Evangelism School was opened, and it was for both genders. We now know it as the Moody Bible Institute. And Emma Dreyer's dream has become Dwight Moody's dream. And God has answered her prayers as well. And all of that happens within a 20-year span of when she started praying. So just because we don't see our prayer answered today doesn't mean it's not being answered. Sometimes we just got to have patience and trust. And we learned that with Emma Dreyer, and she continues to work with Moody, and you know, they continue to feed off of each other and admire one another for the work and for the things that they add to the kingdom. Moody would use these schools. Education was super, super important to him. Wonder why? Probably because he liked so much of it himself. I'm sure later in life he got better. I'm sure he learned to read better. I'm sure he learned to, anything that he had deficits in, I'm sure even maybe Miss Dreyer taught him and helped him out. But starting out, like I said, we know he took some flack. And so it's no wonder that education becomes a big issue for him, a big thing for him, because he knew the impact in his own life. He knew the impact on how he could be perceived and how he could be welcomed with others based on a limited education. And so it was very important to him that poor people, that minorities, that people who were ostracized, that people that didn't get access to that got access to that. And that's a dream that Emma Dreyer shared as well. And so he was able to do that. It's estimated that by 1911, 5,000 student volunteers in America came through Moody's ministries and schools. 5,000 people came through it by 1911. November 16th of 1899, D.L. Moody would preach his last sermon. He would become ill after that, and he would just take a train ride home to Northfield and decide he's going to rest, and he's an older man now. God has been faithful. He's seen God faithful. Thousands and thousands of people have been saved. To this day are affected. His church still remains. His ministry still remains. His institute still remains. You can go to it even to this day. All his legacy lives on. His ability to preach to anybody, for anybody, without offending anybody is second to none. There's not a man in history that was able to please everybody. And Moody was able to do that because he just kept it simple. He didn't try to make it complicated, and he didn't try to figure out, world peace and solve world hunger. He just wanted to get as many people in his lifeboat as he could. So he goes home, and several months prior to this, he had friends and connections who mentioned that they had noticed significant weight gain. Now, he wasn't a small man in the first place. So for them to notice significant weight gain means there had to have been some significant weight gain in the few months preceding his illness. It's never been confirmed. It's never been diagnosed. Nobody really knows, but it's speculated that Moody had congestive heart failure. And he passed away on December the 26th, 1899, surrounded by his family. It was a peaceful end to a very busy life. This is a man who lived through the Civil War, through the Chicago fire, through political turmoil, death on battlefields, foreign countries, countries on the brink of war over religion where he ministered. I mean, this is a man who saw conflict and adversity. This is a man who was doubted and questioned. This is a man who stood faithful and firm for the Lord in the face of it all, and saw God work in miraculous ways and in powerful ways in the ministries that he created. And so he definitely impacted the introduction of women to the faith. He impacted education as being a priority and not a gift or a luxury or something only afforded to the rich, that education should be given to all. Gender, poor, minority, didn't matter, that people needed that. And that you couldn't really grow as a Christian and understand your life as a Christian if you couldn't even read his word. And there was a little touch of that with the publishing of the Bibles that we talked about earlier on as well. So that's kind of a theme that carries on throughout. But education wasn't a big cornerstone for the church until Moody said it's got to be part of it. It has to be part of it. You can't have one without the other. And so he made a difference. He's impacted the world that we still feel today. His legacy lives on, and I'm thankful that Dwight Moody was able to bring the world what he brought the world, that he was able to, in spite of everything, serve Jesus faithfully and not get swayed or knocked off track or discouraged. I'm sure he probably had moments, but that it didn't last long enough to affect his actions. That is the story, the brief history. There's much more. You can Google him. You'll find a lot of stuff of Dwight Moody, D.L. Moody, in our history. That'll wrap it up for this Friday. Thank you so very much for joining us. This is Good Friday. I pray that you have had time today to reflect on the cross and the love of Christ, to reflect on this great sacrifice that he has given us, like Dwight Moody. The cross is our lifeboat, and there's room for all of us to get in. There's room for all of us to make it. And so I hope today that you're able to reflect on that. If you're not already saved, I hope that God has revealed to you in a mighty way, and that you find a life full of joy and happiness in his loving arms. I hope this week was great. I hope your Easter is amazing this weekend, and I can't wait to see y'all next Friday. Thanks for tuning in.